this is a specific one. What surprises me is how many people actually resist this, and they make light of it as though it's just semantics. And what we're saying in this conversation is it's not. It's more than that, especially at a time when law needs to change the way it's organized and who gets to participate and who gets to invest. And it really makes it a little bit harder to get it done.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
We're thrilled to be joined by Ralph Baxter. For those of you who don't know, Ralph Baxter is a leading voice in the legal profession who inspires change in the law and has done so for years. He's now a strategic advisor to law firms, law technology companies, and corporate law departments after he successfully served as the chairman and CEO of ORIC for almost 25 years. Ralph is widely considered a leading influencer in the legal profession. He serves on the board of INTAP, and he co-hosts Law Tech Now, his own podcast on the Legal Talk Network. Thank you for making time to do this podcast, Ralph.
Yeah, delighted to be here.
We're also joined by an equally impressive professional in the legal services sector, and that's John Croft. John currently serves as the president and co-founder of Elevate. Elevate's a law company that's dedicated to helping law departments and law firms with practical ways to improve their efficiency, quality, and business outcomes. John's considered one of the leading innovators in the legal services industry, being at it for over 30 years. My name is Julie Savarino. I am a non-practicing lawyer, and I work with lawyers, law firms, legal vendors, and in-house departments to create, enhance, and deliver client value. I've delivered and invented several of the leading events in the legal profession, and I've also served in-house in client and business development positions with leading law firms and a leading accounting firm. Ryan, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Julie. So we have three industry-leading people in the legal industry today for one very specific topic that has certainly been trending, as far as I've seen, really picking up momentum in the past several months, but it's something that several of you have been discussing for, I believe, years at this point. And the core focus topic that we'll be discussing today is why the term non-lawyer is now obsolete in the legal industry. And so starting there, who kind of came up with this being something that seemed to be kind of a recurring theme in law firms or in the industry, and decided that, maybe we should start addressing this term because it actually may not be the right way to describe people that are working within the legal industry?
Yeah, this is Ralph Baxter. I think everybody is aware of this issue. I don't think anyone came up with it. It may be obsolete in a certain sense, but it's in common use. Almost everywhere you go in law, when people are describing the organization that delivers legal service, at some point they will distinguish the people who work in the law firm, in the alternative legal service provider, wherever it is, as either a lawyer or a non-lawyer. And they categorize everybody who is not a lawyer, or this is the problem, and it's pervasive. Anyone who's not a lawyer is defined as a non-lawyer. And it's been talked about for years and years and years, but it continues to happen. And I think right now there's been as much attention to it on social media as there has been, because it continues to be a sensitive subject. It is demotivating to the people who are in legal service, who are not lawyers, and has other implications we can talk about. And so it's worthy of discussion, because it's not going to go away on its own. It's not going to go away without conscious effort by people in legal service to refrain from using the term.
Something about that brought this to my attention. So I've been in the legal marketing part of legal services for about a decade. And I think I kind of slowly got indoctrinated into saying non-lawyer because other, non-lawyers kind of said it. And I didn't really find it to be a negative connotation maybe years ago. But I guess like where you guys are standing, that you're working with people that are finding it to be a term that kind of maybe is oftentimes maybe a little bit belittling or demeaning. Is that the case?
Well, I think so. I think, and it's not intentional. I don't think people say this intending to belittle or intending to be disrespectful. It's just a convention. It's what people do. But I think it reflects something, and I think what bothers people is it reflects a narrow view of who can do work that is important in legal service. And there was a day when all of the work in legal service was done by lawyers, was done mainly by law firms. But in today's world, so much of the work that is done in legal service needs to be done and is done by professionals who have careers in legal service who are not lawyers. They bring other perspectives, other training, other skills to the table.
I agree. And look, I think that's certainly where I was coming from when I met Julie and we ended up talking about this. I think there were sort of two sides to this whole discussion. There is the point you just made about there are different skill sets today in 2020 that are required to deliver legal services than there were, let's say, 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, it was quite simple. If you needed legal services, you went to a law firm or you were working in a law department, and everyone was a lawyer. And as you said earlier, I don't think anyone meant this to be an offensive thing. But just for clarity, they divided the world into lawyers and non-lawyers, and that was kind of binary. But I think a couple of things have happened. One is that today there is a need for lawyers, absolutely. But there's also a need for project managers. There's a need for salespeople. There's a need for data scientists. There's a need for a range of skills, one of which is being a lawyer. I think just picking the lawyer bit and saying there's us and everyone else leads to, well, why don't you pick data scientists and non-data scientists? So half of the conversation I think today is around sort of what is an appropriate term for the professional skill set that is required to deliver legal services.
Yeah, Ryan, I think it's a subtle distinction. It's a subtle, maybe unintentional thing that, as Ralph and John have articulated, has evolved over time, and it's just sort of this default that we use. But nevertheless, because it can be perceived as offensive to some people, not inclusive, right? We're all talking about we want more diversity, we want more inclusion. And really this term goes to inclusion, Ralph, don't you think?
Oh, it does. And I think John had it exactly right. But I think there's something else that happens here. There is this traditional outlook born of the times before that John was describing, that the lawyers do the work. The lawyers deliver the service. If it's important, the lawyers do it. And this dichotomy reinforces that. One of the most important changes that need to happen in law is reimagining how we go about doing what we do. Thinking about better process. That's not novel. Everyone knows that. We need to be better at process design. So what we really need at the table, we're deciding how to try the case or do the deal, is somebody who actually is not a lawyer, who brings a different perspective. And I worry that it reduces the likelihood the lawyer will reach out when the lawyer thinks there's them, there's us.
Well, interestingly, a person like me, I am a licensed lawyer. I do not practice. So I am a non-practicing lawyer. There goes the non-term again. But interestingly, and you know this, Ralph, I think us lawyers, we as lawyers, we tend to just don't really like anybody different. So even though I'm not really looked down upon as a non-lawyer, I'm looked down upon because I have that different perspective.
There's an interesting, if you sort of extrapolate this discussion out, where one of the interesting places you end up at is, and it's not to do with who does the work, but is who ends up owning the business that does the work. And what I mean is, in the old days, and in fact in most of North America now, I believe there's a couple of states that are starting to change, but in New York, for instance, the only people that can own Sullivan & Cromwell are the partners of Sullivan & Cromwell. And to be a partner of Sullivan & Cromwell, you have to be a lawyer. one of the interesting things about life over here in the UK is that, as I'm sure you know, about 5 years ago, we had some reforms, and one of those reforms meant that anyone can now own a law firm. You can have this alternative business structure. A couple of things have happened. One is that law companies like Elevate and others have started acquiring law firms. We acquired one called Hailbury last year. So we can actually practice law as well as do business law. And then second of all, half a dozen classic traditional law firms have listed on the London Stock Exchange. So any of us can go with $100 to invest in Facebook shares, or we can go and invest in. It's not quite what we're talking about today, but I do think the two things are connected, because I think that the history of lawyers and non-lawyers happened for a reason. The lawyers can only do this type of, you have to be a lawyer to do this kind of work. And second of all, everyone that owns the firm is a lawyer. And so if you're not a lawyer, you're never going to be sitting in that equity group, which is why I use that sort of velvet rope term, and you'll always end up working for the lawyers. Whereas in law companies and now in the UK in publicly quoted law firms, you can have a CEO, and you can have a CTO, and you can have a head of sales, and you can have a head of data science, and all these other things we're talking about. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but all of those skills are required to deliver the legal services, as opposed to, in the past, being a lawyer to deliver those services.
John, I think you're making a really important point. I'm a very big, genuine proponent of regulatory reform in the United States. Sometimes people misapprehend that the idea of permitting ownership in law firms is somehow designed to make the partners in the law firms wealthy with an IPO or some other objective. But really, it's about access to capital for a legal service business on the one hand, but importantly is the point you're making. It enables the people who are critical to the future of legal service enterprises to participate in the equity of the firm. And in the U.S., that's not possible. This great COO of the law firm, or the person in charge of project management, as you say, those people can work in law firms, but they can't have a stake in the enhancement, the growth of the business that they are causing to be built. And it reinforces this idea. We're talking about this because of nomenclature, but it's really a more fundamental idea about which human beings in the organization are permitted, as you say, at the table, which ones are permitted to do the important work.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, there isn't a related issue as well. Not only is there regulatory reform pressure occurring in the United States, right? The ABA recently just came down on this, and were very specific in the sense that they as an entity said, actually, we're not going to approve of joint ownership. They're definitely not going to support that, right? But some states are really pushing it, and it's really because of that equal access to justice issue. But a related issue is our model rules that all lawyers need to follow, which 5.5 is the unauthorized practice of law. And that's another reason this whole dichotomy between the lawyer, the non-lawyer came up, because it's in real life, it's very important. If you look at a lawyer that does work for individual people, let's say it's a divorce lawyer, those clients will often call that lawyer's office multiple times in a day, because it's a very emotional thing to go through divorce, right? So the paralegals have to say, often, I am not a lawyer, I'm not a licensed lawyer, I cannot give you legal advice, because often they're the ones that are taking the calls and listening to the crying. So, Ralph, what do you think about that issue?
Well, I think that's one of the two most important issues we need to change. We need to permit more people to participate in delivering legal service in a way that is not risky for them. It's a crime in many states to engage, to cross the line between being a paralegal and doing something that is the practice of law. So, and the idea here is to get the right set of people at the table. And part of it's different skill sets, part of it's different cost. If you want to be a lawyer you need to make a huge investment in time and money to get a legal education. And that's a great thing to do, and it has great value in some settings. But a lot of the work that's involved in legal service does not require you to have that education, make that investment. And so the cost embedded in doing the work is much lower if the workforce can include people who haven't made that investment and can afford to work for a lower amount of money. Because the reason this issue comes up in access to justice is that we have this disgraceful situation in the United States with more than half of our people not being able to get the legal service they need. They often don't even know they need legal service. They don't recognize that the problem is one that could be made better with access to some legal service. But at any rate, that's our situation in this country that prides itself on the rule of law. Part of the reason that is so is that the economics of the law disable people from delivering the service at a price that people can afford.
I still think if the topic, if the sort of sujet du jour is why do we have a problem with the issue of non-lawyer? As I've said to lots of people in the past, if I've talked to them, I'm not and move away. Maybe I get, Julie, sort of divorce, and in the UK here there are also half a dozen, I think 5 things that I can't do as a non-lawyer. Go to court and do somebody's will and various other things like that. But if you just we operate in corporate in the corporate legal world, and so corporate legal work, doing contracts. I'm not a lawyer. I've never been to law school. I've never had a day in legal training in my life, but for 32 years I've been negotiating contracts, and I know how they work, and I know what a termination clause is and limitation of liability clause. So you don't need to be a lawyer to do that work. However, I think all of that point and the other points made earlier about who does what are sort of changing and are interesting, and we're kind of on a journey. But I would, if I was sort of pushed for my answer on what my real issue with non-lawyer is, it is a small subtlety. It's a nuance, as you said, Julie, earlier on, which is I personally think there is all the difference in the world with me saying I'm not a lawyer rather than I'm a non-lawyer, and that was really what triggered me having this first conversation with Julie. It was, all of these other points are connected. They are historical. They're the reason that it's happened in the first place. You don't get called a non-doctor. It's just, I just personally find it a little belittling. Triggered this whole conversation.
Yeah. I actually wanted to say something about that because honestly, John, I don't know if you know this, Ralph. I didn't even ask John his permission to post that. I was just so struck by the conversation. So originally, when I did the post, I didn't use his name because I didn't have his permission, right? So I said, a very successful entrepreneur. Well, let me tell you why I posted it. Because John's comments made me realize, Ralph, how intrinsic it is in my psyche to say this. Look, I said about myself already today, I'm a non-practicing lawyer. So I have this non-thing embedded in my psyche. So what I guess the reason for my post was not only to educate myself and make me more aware of this, but I get it that sometimes I have to use not a licensed lawyer for purposes of practice and representation, but just that term non-lawyer, now knowing what it does to other people, it's making me more aware, and my whole purpose of the post, Ralph, was to make other lawyers aware so that we can just try to make different choices. It's not that hard. I think awareness was my point.
Right. I think, so you're right. I think the way John put it is terrific. I think the more people who hear it put the way John just did, there's a difference between saying I'm not a lawyer and someone else calling you a non-lawyer. I think would be edifying, illuminating to people. But it's been around forever. It's easy. That's part of how we got into it. It's just easy to distinguish. And so people have to be conscious about it. They have to recognize this is no longer an acceptable way. It's not in anybody's best interest to do that easy thing any more than it is. I mean, medicine is the obvious way to see it. You don't walk in and call the nurse a non-doctor or anybody else a non-doctor. And I think John's also right. We have all of these other issues that are percolating. This is a specific one. What surprises me is how many people actually resist this, and they make light of it as though it's just semantics. And what we're saying in this conversation is it's not. It's more than that, especially at a time when law needs to change the way it's organized and who gets to participate and who gets to invest. And it really makes it a little bit harder to get it done.
It does. And I mean, there are other examples of it as well, without going sort of down another rabbit hole. But as more and more people have called me over the last few weeks after Julie's post, I think, so if you look at the comments on the post, and it was crazy because we got over 100,000 or something, people looking at this. But I think some people completely missed the point and said, but you've got to understand who is a lawyer and who isn't. And I completely agree. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not trying to blur the lines. It is the semantic of how you describe it. But one of the other things that have come up, and from a number of people I know that work at law firms on this topic, is fee earner. Are you a fee earner or non-fee earner? And again, in the old days, the only people that could technically earn fees were the lawyers. So I get why that happened. But, these days, the project managers and the data scientists and everyone else, just as much the reason why people pick that firm over that firm and pay the money they pay. They are certainly earning some of the fees.
At least 3 comments on that post are saying, stop. They're basically saying to me, Ralph, they're saying, Julie, stop trying to control what people say. And I try to respond back, and when it's in writing, it's a little different, but I'm like, thank you for that perspective. I'm actually not trying to control. I'm trying to just create awareness. I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to tell you you're politically incorrect. It's just a basic question of respect, in my opinion.
Right. We do need to have a conversation. People are not going to change this on their own because it's easy, and it's been in the accepted parlance, but we do need to put a spotlight on it and change it. It's what John just said about fee earners is an interesting observation. So that's an expression that's been commonplace in the UK for a long, long time. And I thought of that a little bit differently, because the fee earner permits you to capture both lawyers and people who are not lawyers that day is going to go away as we progress in the use of automation and other ways of delivering legal service. The idea that we get paid by the hour, which is where those fees come up, we get paid that way, is going to go away. And so then we're all going to be fee earners, right?
Personally, I know Ralph very well. I don't know you as well, John, but Ralph is one of the most, I can't even tell you what an incredibly kind and respectful person and professional he is to everybody. And I try to emulate somebody like him, and what this whole point is that we all value the other people that work with us. I mean, most of us can't get anything done without our assistants. We all value them. So this is a tiny thing, but it's also a tiny thing that can have big impact. So for anybody who does like to have a great relationship with people they work with, if you can just be aware that this could be offensive and try to use a different term, which is, you could just say so-and-so does not practice law, that would just make a world of difference, in my opinion.
Have you discussed in the community what like a designation kind of would look like, or a more favorable one? Is it legal professional? Is it like a professional in the legal industry, or is it too closely construed as a lawyer?
Yeah, there's a 2-part kind of answer to that, I think. What we need is something, I think, an expression that replaces, that will describe all the people who work in legal service. And then within that, there will be nurses and doctors. As there is in medicine, there'll be lawyers and data analysts and lawyers and project managers and so on. But we need an overarching expression so that we don't need to characterize half of the people in the workforce as in the negative or in some alternative way. So I think legal service professional that's what I use.
Yeah, legal service professional sort of covers everyone. If you were to walk into a law firm or a law company, I understand that we could all call ourselves that. I think my preferred answer to the question is how do we not group everyone that isn't a lawyer into the same bucket? Because that is partly why it feels a little offensive to be on the receiving end of it. Do I call myself a non-lawyer? No, I'm a salesman, or I'm a technician, or I'm a project manager. If I'm a project manager, that doesn't make me the same as the salesman and the data scientist. We're not all the same person just because none of us are lawyers. We've all got our own little, our own descriptor.
Right, which is, it comes up. I couldn't agree with you more, but it comes up because there are moments when people are in a circumstance they feel like they need to refer to the workforce, or a part of the workforce that includes humans who are licensed to practice law and humans who are not. And so it's at that moment that it comes up, and then they say, well, even though, and this just adds insult to injury. Someone will say, even though she's a non-lawyer, on their way to saying, she's smart or she's something, and
backhanded compliment,
right. But we don't need to. Yeah. If someone's a data analyst in the chemical industry, they don't have to say whether I'm in the chemical services world and I'm a data analyst. They just say I'm a data analyst. And so too in law, but sometimes it comes up, and that's where this word comes up. And you can see it, I think, when you're in a group, high achieving people, and someone says non-lawyer, and half the people in the room who feel good about what they're doing and where they're doing it and everything are affected. You can see it if you're paying attention. You can see the reaction.
Ryan, to answer your question, you're saying what are the alternatives to this sort of very controversial non-lawyer term? There are 3 levels of alternative that were just articulated by John and Ralph. There's an overarching term, so just scrap non-lawyer when it's not necessary for legal purposes. You could use this is Julie Savarino. She's a business professional. This is Julie Savarino. She's a legal service professional that works in our firm. Another possibility that has been suggested in other content about this subject is allied business professional. So that's choice 1, an overarching term, right? Choice 2 is use the title. Julie Savarino, she does client relations and client value for us. John Croft, he's the president and CEO and runs the operations of Elevate. Now, when necessary, all you need to do after that is say, Julie does not practice law, right? I can say the same thing for John, right? Or Julie is not a licensed lawyer. Same thing for John.
There are some tasks that only people with a law license are permitted to perform. And so this distinction is going to be lurking there because that's so. Going to court is the most obvious example, being closing to the jury. But otherwise, I think if we just conceive of this the way you were describing it earlier, John, that we're all in this together, we're working together as colleagues to serve the interests of our clients, build a sound business for the firm. That's what we're doing, and we're doing it together, and we all bring different things to the party. Then it'll be a healthier organization. Everybody will feel better about it, and we'll get away from this distinction.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm glad that you were able to discuss everything that you've studied and written about over the past couple of years and bring it on the podcast so we can all have a discussion about it.
Yeah, Ryan, one thing, I actually, you mentioned writing. So I wrote my views on this on my new blog called Legal Services Today. So I'll put a plug in for my blog, and I set out what I think there just a week ago.
Good. Well, I look forward to perusing your blog. That sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. John, I know you have to go, but if Julie and John, you want to plug at least one resource where anyone that's listening can follow up and learn a little bit more about our topic?
I just think everybody should follow each of us on LinkedIn because there's a lot of different things that we all post on LinkedIn, and then Ralph has a great blog. And then the one thing I want to say that if people aren't aware about is Elevate Services, which is John's company, produces every single year, and they have only for the past 2 years, but it's phenomenal. It's called an Equity and Inclusion Survey, and it's of their entire company. And it's a great example of law company in the legal space that actually surveys and takes the opinions and the statistics and everything, anonymized, obviously, of their entire workforce, not just the lawyers. So that's inclusion in action.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. We over here in the UK, a couple of years ago, the government mandated every firm to do this in the UK, which is to track their gender pay gap. And it won't surprise you that the results were pretty terrible, because whilst most firms bring a roughly equal mix of people in at junior and trainee level, sort of 50-50 male and female, by the time it gets to equity partnership and board, it's about 80-20 males female. So we felt strongly about that, and rather than just talk about it, we said, well, whilst we're not a law firm, so we weren't mandated by the government to do that, we felt a slight moral obligation to. So you can see it on our website, elevateservices.com. It's our Equitability and Inclusion Report. And I suppose the good news is I am pleased to say we do have a small gender pay gap, which is that we pay women a few % more than we pay men.
Outstanding.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.